how we're conditioned by fear, what fear is, and how we can move through fear. I'd like to begin with a quote from Plato. He said this: "We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light." Fear often produces an instantaneous reaction. We see a child about to fall and we rush to catch it before it hits the ground and hurts itself. Actually, this kind of reaction is what I call instinct rather than fear. The difference is that no thinking is required. You know instinctively and instantly that the child must be protected. It is a natural response of life. What we often refer to as fear, however, is something more complex than instinct, since it is a combination of perception, thought, belief, memory, and habits acquired from previous similar experiences. In the case of the child, you may or may not be able to support your action with a logical explanation. You might say, as we often do, that you were afraid the child would get hurt. You might just as logically say, though it is less likely, that you wanted the child to be well. The first is a statement of fear, the second a statement of love, and each one arises from energetically different states of consciousness. We have learned to speak mostly in the language of fear rather than love. Fear is considered irrational when the current situation has nothing to do with a past experience, and yet our reaction to it is just as it was in the past, a reaction, a repeated action. These days, we often describe this phenomenon as being triggered. What we call fear today is a psychological phenomenon rather than an existential instinct or response. The breeding ground of fear is story. For instance, we know that it isn't safe or life-preserving to put our hand on a hot stove. The heat warns us of the danger. We don't need to think about it. Now, some people may argue that we have learned to avoid a hot stove, and this may well be true. In this case, what was originally a learning experience to avoid pain has now become encoded as an instinctual response. I want to be really clear here that the avoidance of pain is not always a fearful response. In fact, the avoidance of pain is always essentially a loving response. However, it can become a fearful response when, instead of coming from and moving in a consciousness of love, we might be coming from and moving deeper into a consciousness of fear. What is worth realizing is that every reaction of fear has, at its very core, a loving or life-affirming intent, such as, I want to take care of myself. The problem for us is that I want to take care of myself can easily morph into a mostly subconscious, I am afraid of you, you are a threat to me, you don't care about me, I cannot trust you, you are the cause of my suffering, and so on. To try and make this clearer, let's take an example such as when someone says something which our thinking mind might construe as a personal attack on us. This is a conclusion we formed based on past experience and in relation to someone else from the distant past, often a significant other in our childhood. However, in our reaction to the person today, that reaction typically arises from long-established habits which may take the form of a hostile and even physically violent behavior. Or it may take the form of a passive-aggressive behavior, such as a thinly laced insult or an emotional or physical withdrawal. This kind of reaction, which draws on past experience, is how we have become conditioned by fear. Fear prevents us from being present to the natural flow of life and responding from its natural impulses. If you look at fear in this way, you realize that fear is actually a block that our conditioned mind puts in the way of life, which is, in essence, love. It results in the withholding of love. Put another way, what we describe as fear is only ever felt when we block the natural, effortless, and unconditional flow of life, which some may call love or God. If we learn anything at all, let's learn this. Because fear is activated so quickly, it obstructs our ability to respond from a place of stillness, of clarity, of clear seeing, clear thinking, and of presence. However, if we cultivate the habit of noticing our thoughts and the sensations in our body, we can use the arousal of fear as a prompt to step out of story and allow us to fall into the blissful, storyless present. I'd like to invite you to do a meditation with me. There are 2 meditations, in fact. Let's begin with the first, and we'll do this by becoming still. And you can do this by tuning into the sounds around you, tuning into your breath, into the sensations in your body. And when you've done this for a while, just let your attention become open and spacious, very soft, rather than focused on any one particular thing. And stay in this space and notice whatever thoughts, sensations, images, feelings, or desires arise spontaneously within you. I'm going to ask you a question. What is happening in your life right now that arouses fear or anxiety? If there is nothing in your current circumstances, think of something from the past. Bring it to mind and allow it to play out on your mind screen. Give yourself full permission to let it play out fully. Now, think of the worst case scenario and let that play out in your mind screen. And as you are doing that, notice the sensations in your body. Now here's something unusual. Allow that movie that's playing on your mind to reveal some form of action that you might take. I want to stress that this action is not necessarily a solution. We are not looking for solutions. We're simply allowing for the more intuitive mind to reveal something to us in the form of an action. And you might find that this action may seem irrelevant, it may seem so random, it may seem so meaningless. That doesn't matter. Because what we're really looking for is an interruption of that movie that's playing out, that's actually repeating itself, an interruption that will take us in a different direction. So give yourself permission to do this. Be patient, don't force. It will if you just relax and watch, focus on watching the movie, not being absorbed into the movie, but just watching it. You will find that something arises. Now, we're going into the final part of this meditation. Now, I want you to imagine that this particular situation, this particular problem that has happened either in the past or that is currently playing out in your life, has been fully resolved. Once again, we're not assuming that we know what the solution is. We probably don't, but we just want to take the hypothetical situation where it has resolved itself. And in that state of resolution, I want you to ask yourself, who would I be? Who would I be when this situation, when this problem is fully resolved? What would my mind and my body be experiencing in this state of resolution? Once again, don't try and think the answer, but let it arise spontaneously within your body. And then, perhaps as a thought, as a word, as a sentence, or as an image, as a color, who knows, doesn't really matter. But this allowing, this way of giving yourself permission to consider, who would I be when this problem is fully resolved, when this fear is fully gone? Who would I be, and what state would my mind and body be? Okay, now I want you to notice that even though you might have played out a fearful experience in your mind, you're still here, you're still alive, you're still breathing, you're still intact. I want you to keep that in mind. Let's go to the second meditation. This is another way that you can work with fear. Once again, think of a situation, whether in your current circumstances or something from the past, that has caused you fear, worry, or anxiety. Now, as you bring this event or this experience up in your mind, notice once again what's happening in your body. And now, I'd like you to consider this question. And I'm going to give you two options by which you can answer the question. So, firstly, here's a question. Which is really useful for you moving forward? Option 1, that this situation completely disappears. And option 2, regardless of whether the situation disappears or not, you realize that you have the power and the insight and the creative potential to navigate through this experience and arrive at a safe and a useful place with an outcome that serves not only your own good, but the good of all others concerned, including the people that you may not be aware of, who might nevertheless be affected. So I'll repeat the options. Number 1, that the situation completely disappears, or number 2, that regardless of whether it does or not, you realize that you have the capability, the power, the insight, the creative potential to move through the situation so that you reach an outcome that serves the good of all. And so, before I finish, I'd like to remind you that you always have the power, the potential, and the creative ability to overcome any experience of fear, no matter what shape or form it takes.